So now, to our featured speakers. What the hell's wrong with Kansas? Everyone has their opinion, but we are privileged to hear from the vantage point of two former Kansas governors, one a Republican and one a Democrat. Both Governors Hayden and Carlin are members of Save Kansas Coalition, a coalition of centrist, nonpartisan groups, including Women for Kansas. And you'll be hearing more about Save Kansas Coalition later. But let's welcome to the podium first Republican Mike Hayden, who served as the 41st governor of Kansas from 1987 to 1991, and then as the secretary of the Kansas Wildlife Department under Governors Kathleen Sebelius and Mark Parkinson. Originally from Colby and a graduate of Kansas State University, he currently lives in Lawrence with his wife, Patty, who's with him today. Their daughter, Chelsea, is a law professor at KU, and their daughter, Annie, is a medical researcher in Indianapolis. Governor Hayden, welcome. Do you still have time to hunt and fish?
You better save your applause until I'm done. Let me say the most important woman in Kansas to me is here, and I'd like for her to stand up, my wife Patty. Let me also say that I'm pleased to be here with Governor Carlin. John and I served many years together in many capacities. I followed him later on as Speaker of the House, and I followed him to the governor's office. And while we have had certainly our differences over the years politically, we remained great friends, and we fought those battles with civility, which is sorely lacking today in American politics and in Kansas politics. And I have always had the greatest regard for John. He and I both come from very small towns and from agricultural backgrounds, our families. And so we had a lot of similarities. But the one thing that binds us together, both as a Republican and as a Democrat, is our love for Kansas. It's a great place. It's a state with great history, and we want to see that it stays that way. And obviously, we wouldn't be here today if we weren't very concerned about the state of affairs. And it is refreshing to see these candidates come up with ambition of holding public office. I remember the first time I ran. I went over to see the Republican County Chairman, and he sat down at his kitchen table, and I said, "Bob, I'm going to run for the legislature, and I want your support." And he said, "Well, of course you have my support." I was 28 years old. But he said, "You know, we've never elected anybody under 50 before." And we won that first election against an incumbent by 250 votes. And that was the beginning then of an unbelievable adventure, really, in Kansas politics and in Kansas government. And all the while trying to maintain a vision of what this state should be, a respect for its heritage, but most importantly, a concept of what the future should hold for our state. And I've as John has, I've known every governor personally since 1964, every one, those living and those deceased. And I would say to you that we've had almost, in that period of time, almost an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. It's almost unlike Congress, which we haven't sent a Democrat to the United States Senate since the 1930s, unlike Congress, our governorship has resided on both sides of the aisle. And if you look at Kansas history, whether we had Republicans or Democrats, whether we had men or women, our state basically was on a pretty even keel historically. Sure, we've had our moments, as every state does and as politics always provides. But by and large, our state has moved forward throughout history with leadership from both Republicans and Democrats, and both rural and urban governors, because they principally put the well-being of the state ahead of all else. And unfortunately, in recent times in American politics, it has become terribly polarized. You can see it at the national level, of course, but it's not uncommon at the state level as well. And that really doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well for the future. It doesn't bode well necessarily for our current state of affairs. And that's really kind of what brings John and I here. And it is what motivates, I'm sure, a lot of these candidates we saw here today. Another thing historically is that the state, again, through hard times and good times, has been relatively fiscally responsible. We have tried to keep taxes as low as possible, but at the same time provide the services that people need, and also trying to maintain adequate reserves. And in fact, many times those reserves have been up not only in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but and sometimes approaching nearly $1 billion. The state of affairs today is such that we virtually have no reserves. In fact, we are in Kansas in the financial ditch. We have been driven in the financial ditch by decisions that have been made both by the governor and ratified by the legislature. And you in the long term, you can't be in debt. In the long term, you have to be fiscally responsible while at the same time providing the services that people expect. And right now, that isn't happening in Kansas. Our state hospitals face decertification. Our highways are crumbling. Our schools are not adequately financed. Our retirement system faces tremendous challenges, and we virtually don't have a penny in our pocket. That's a very, very sad state of affairs, and it's one that needs to be corrected. If you look at the policies that have been adopted, and I would say this, as a Republican, and as someone who's known the current governor, for a long, long time, every governor is entitled to bring forward their own policies. Everyone's entitled to advocate those policies, and even, as Governor Brownback himself said, experiment. Well, sometimes we experiment, and sometimes it works out good. But sometimes it's a failure. And the current experiment in Kansas is failing. Now, I believe that those legislators who voted for those failures did so in good faith. They thought that by lowering taxes, we could stimulate the economy. But it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And the truth is, the hardest thing for a politician to do is admit they're wrong. That's the hardest thing. I know from personal experience. The hardest thing to do is admit you're wrong. But our state of affairs is so bad in Kansas, financially, that it's time to admit that the experiment didn't work. It's time to admit that we don't have the resources to provide the people the necessities they need. And I'm not talking about the luxuries. I'm simply talking about maintaining the roads, getting our state hospitals recertified, getting the retirement system on an even keel. I'm not talking about any luxuries at all. But right now, we're not headed toward financial stability. In fact, I don't know if you saw it, but just this week, Moody's downgraded the bonds, not only of the state, but of our state universities. That's a terrible tragedy. It shouldn't be happening. I don't understand why more people are not excited about it or concerned about it. Unfortunately, people in this room are, they wouldn't be here. But in a broad sense, I have never seen, and like I said, I've known a lot of governors personally and have respect for them all. I've never seen our state in such dire financial condition because we cut taxes, but we didn't cut spending correspondingly. If you're going to reduce your income, any businessman knows you better reduce your expenses. Well, we didn't do that. And so we're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into a hole. And if you just look at the decisions that have been made, the highway fund's not only been robbed continually now for a number of years, but virtually depleted. The retirement system, the payments that should have been made to it have been delayed and delayed and delayed, and you wonder if they are going to be made. And every retiree should be concerned about that, and every current worker should be concerned about that. These are not the kind of decisions that are in the Kansas tradition, and they need to be changed. And the politicians who made those decisions need to stand up and say, hey, you know what? We tried this, and we tried it in good faith. We thought it was going to work, but it didn't. And as a result of that, we either need to get a reversal in course or we need to get new people into public office. It doesn't do any good, as we've seen so often in Topeka, to blame the president or to blame the Congress. You know, it's easy in Kansas to run against the Democrat president, and it's easy to run against the Congress in Washington. That's the easiest political ploy in the world. But these problems weren't caused by the president, and they weren't caused by the Congress. They were caused by decisions made right here in Kansas by the governor and by the legislature. And I'm proud to be a Republican. I'm proud to have served in the legislature for 14 years and in the governor's office for 4. But I am not proud of the current financial situation we're in caused by my colleagues in the Republican Party. They should be ashamed. They need to come forward and admit that the tax policies didn't work and that we've got to get the retirement system back on solid funding. We've got to get money back into the highway fund. We've got to get education, both at the elementary and secondary level, and higher education on solid financial footing. Why in the world? Why in the world would someone let things get so deteriorated that the bond rating for our universities is downgraded? It's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. And we need change. Let me say one other thing before I close, and that is about the refusal to expand Medicaid. You know, most poor people are disenfranchised and don't participate in the political process very actively. So it's easy, if you're a politician, to ignore them. And that's exactly what's happened. That's exactly what's happened. But it's just not poor people who lack adequate health care. The real truth is that many of our rural hospitals are in financial jeopardy. Many of them. It's always a struggle in a small town to keep the hospital and the clinic open and operating. And many of these potential Medicaid recipients live in small towns and rural areas, and many times right now, they're seeking emergency medical care that's not reimbursed. It doesn't make sense to continue on a partisan basis to refuse to expand Medicaid. Republicans and Democrats need to come together. They need to listen to the Kansas Hospital Association. They need to visit these rural hospitals and rural clinics. And they need to see the people who are seeking emergency medical attention because they have no monetary means to pay for it, and get a better understanding. The real truth is it's not only a shot in the arm for the economy and for rural hospitals, but most importantly, it provides the care that the poorest of our citizens desperately need. I'll tell you a story in closing about being a Republican. Yeah, this is an association of women. One of my grandmothers, who lived to be 95, was not only Kansas Mother of the Year, but she was also the state president of the Business and Professional Women. And of course, she was a lifelong Democrat. Well, when I ran for the legislature the very first time, she called me into her study about 2 or 3 weeks before the election. And I was her oldest grandchild, and she said, "Son, I want you to know that I went down today and registered as a Republican." And I said, "Well, grandmother, why did you do that?" And she said, "I couldn't stand the thought of you losing by 1 vote. Thank you very much.
Well said, well said. Democrat John Carlin, a native of Salina and a graduate of Kansas State University, served as the 40th governor of Kansas from 1979 to 1987. For 15 years, from 1995 to 2010, he served as the Archivist of the United States, running the National Archives and Records Administration. He has just finished his 11th year teaching at KSU in the Staley School of Leadership Studies. His 3 grandchildren all live on the East Coast. The only thing close to a hobby that he says he does is working to recruit and train candidates for leadership in Kansas. Governor Carlin.
Thank you very much. Mary, for that kind introduction. You said it just the way I wrote it out on the... I wanted to acknowledge Annie McKay and Lynn Steffen and other leaders of this fine organization who have done so much putting this together and doing a lot of other great things. I need to tell you, following Mike, Jill leaned over and said, "You got trouble, Carlin." I want to put his remarks in perspective. I served with Mike Hayden, and Mike Hayden is a conservative. We have changed so much for him now to be a moderate. Hell, I'm a socialist today. I always feel bad about Mike in one term. I don't know, I've never said this to you, Mike, but I'll share it with everybody. One of my accomplishments he had to implement. One of the constitutional amendments changed the property tax structure. Desperately needed to be done. I'll defend it to my dying day, but it probably kept this fine man from being reelected because he had to live with the results. All the people that benefited from that decision, no appreciation whatsoever. They deserved it. But the people who had benefited from a bad system for decades were really ticked off at this current governor who had nothing to do with putting it in place. He just had to live with it and implement it. So I publicly acknowledge that, Mike, and I mean that quite seriously. I think that was your undoing. And it's a lesson in politics. I always think of Dan Glickman when he got that legislation through for single-engine airplanes to get back in business in Kansas, and they threw him out of office, including independents who got 1,100 employees in a new Cessna plant. I mean, sometimes life is just not fair. I'm going to say and try to balance. Mike and I talked in advance, so I'm going to fill in some gaps, and we'll be getting to questions, so think about that as we move on for the next few minutes. I wanted to mention a little bit about school finance. Not in great detail, because you got smart people in this audience, like Ed Flingy and Dave Seaton and others, and so I'm not going to try to compete with their brilliance. But we've always had a good system of funding public education. It goes back to when we finally, over time, got to understand that our Constitution said public education was a state responsibility, and that the wealth of a district should not directly impact the quality of that education. And so starting back in the 60s and 70s and all through the decades, we did a very consistent job through Democrats and Republicans of funding public education until the last few years. And it's a tragedy that now they're trying to operate differently to the point of wanting to change the Constitution if they have to. They've actually talked about taking that educational point out of the Constitution so the courts could never step in again and declare you're not living up to your responsibility, legislature and governor. That would be an incredible tragedy if that took place. And let me tell you, when I worked as governor on economic development, the quality of the school system was always a major factor. A major factor. I remember one of the great successes was bringing a company to Olathe one time, and it depended on special ed, because the CEO had a child who needed it, and it made a difference that we could point out in Johnson County at that time we had great special education. Investing in education, it's an investment. And the thing that drives me crazy about people who want to cut taxes, downplay funding of education, thinking we're saving money, you're actually paying more. As a taxpayer, you're still paying a lot of taxes, but you're not getting as much for your investment. And if you factor that in, you're far worse off. Now, you can overinvest, you can waste money, of course, and we all want to be opposed to that. But the reality is, if you're not willing to invest in education, if you're not willing, as Mike pointed out, to invest in our infrastructure and keep it up. I'd add to your comments, I visited with Deb Miller the other day, and she says we're already in serious trouble. And if we don't start turning it around, we'll face a situation where it'll be almost impossible to take care and maintain our infrastructure. You know anything about a roof that starts to leak, you better take care of it. It only gets worse. It's only going to cost you more, and it's the same way with roads and highways and bridges. I want to talk a little bit, and quite frankly, quite a bit, in terms of emphasis, about the judicial branch of government. And I really want you to listen and take that seriously. I mean, I'm all for the concerns about education and infrastructure and so forth, but the judicial branch has never been under attack in this history of this state, nothing compared to the last few years. And the thought that we would make a change to a more partisan, money-influenced judiciary is scary as hell. I mean, we can't let that happen. I want to share with you just a few facts, very simple facts, easy to understand. I talked to Mike the other day, and I said, you were governor for 4 years. How many pardons did you issue? 0. I had a 0 for 8 years. 12 years between us, not a single pardon. Not because we were some couple tough asses not wanting to, correct anything or whatever, or admit we would pardon. We were simply following the system, and nobody qualified. There was no evidence. Governor Huckabee, Arkansas, governor a little longer, almost as long as the two of us together, between 8,000 and 10,000 pardons. Not because Huckabee was in any way corrupt. I want to defend him. He was the court of last resort in Arkansas. He had to correct all the mistakes made by a system governed by politics and money. That's what the current direction wants to take us in Kansas, and that would be a disaster that we've got to stop. And this year in this election on those retention votes, we're going to decide which way we're going to go. We allow the Supreme Court to be thrown out, and we will have a Supreme Court appointed by the current governor who will overrule and not do anything in support of public education, will take us down directions we don't want, and start us into a political, money-oriented judiciary. That we can't let happen. I want to say also, get back to education for a second. Higher education. When Mike and I were in Topeka running things, 50% of the budget for higher education was coming from the state. Now, I know that would have been very difficult to maintain. I understand. But we're 20 headed down. And let me tell you, we do not have enough wealth or not enough Jill Dawkins to fund the University of Kansas.
I don't think they came back in.
I hear about Colorado, almost going private. We cannot do that in Kansas. We need a state-supported system of higher education. We have to have it. Absolutely have to have it. And so please keep that in mind and motivate graduates of Wichita State and K-State and KU and our other institutions to realize how much at stake. If we continue on the current path, tuition is almost over the roof now, but it's going to go into outer sphere. It's just going to be a mess. So we've got to elect legislators who understand investing in education is a wise investment. Okay, my last point, starting with August the 2nd. August the 2nd and November the 8th are the two most important dates going forward. Although I could argue every day between now and August the 2nd is by far every day that's most important as it relates to our future. Now, from a practical point of view, I as a Democrat, you might argue, what are you talking about August the 2nd for? Have you got critical primaries? There may be one or two, but I'm not aware of. But It's the Republican primaries on August the 2nd. And I don't care whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent, you'd better be concerned about who gets elected on that day. We've got some great candidates, but they're going to need help. And for you Democrats, you've got Republican friends, independent friends, relatives or whatever that live in some of these key districts that you can influence. You know, the problem we have on August the 2nd is the good people are busy, they're kind of relaxed, they're not driven by wedge issues, they're kind of, well, they don't turn out as much as the other side. And it's going to be a very challenging day. But we've got to win some of these. Senate race in Hutchinson, for an example. Some folks here from Hutchinson. We've got a great candidate, but you got to work and get out there. And so what I want to say as we go forward, every one of you, thank you very much. You're doing great things. You're a part of organizations that are helping, but you've got to dedicate doing something for this cause every single day. You run into people, you talk to people, you connect, you have opportunities. Find out, identify more of those candidates or more of those folks that are going to be supportive of good candidates, and make sure they understand or get the information they need, and make damn sure they're going to vote. But you can all do that. You can all make a difference. You've got to understand that. You've got to understand you can motivate other people to buy in, that they individually, everyone, has the potential to make a difference. We've got great candidates. You have a number of them introduced today, but all across the state. I feel good, very good, but I'm not taking anything for granted. It's going to take money, resources, skilled effort, but most important, what each and every one of you can do individually to influence voters to vote the right way. In some cases, it's a moderate Republican. In many cases, come fall, it's going to be a Democrat. And let me tell you, we've recruited good, solid Democrats. A lot of them are women. The number of women in the legislature is going to go up. So as I close, and as Mike and I take any questions you might have, and I'm quite sure we haven't answered all your questions, we'd be happy to take them. Let me just say, take my message and Mike's message very seriously. We didn't drive down here just because we needed a gig. You know, I won't say this for Mike, but I'm getting an age. Driving from Manhattan it's a challenge, you know. I used to come down here on a weekly basis, seeing Marla, what great times we had. Ed was more, conservative, partisan Republican at the time, again pointing out how things have changed. I mean, so we're happy to be here. Turn in your question. Thank you very much for turning out, and I'm counting on you to do your individual job. Right?
Yeah. The first question, which we will ask each gentleman to answer: how do we turn around the uncivility?
Well, it looks like it's going to take basically a new class of public officials. It is disheartening to see the lack of civility and the extreme partisanship. And John and I try to give you an example of, we had many political battles between us in Topeka, but we were never disagreeable. That's a secret. You bring your issues forward, you do your best to advocate for those, but you have respect for the other side, and you have the willingness to listen. And that's one of the great things that many of our current political office holders have forgotten. I always remember what they said about Senator Nancy Kassebaum. Why she was so effective is because she was a great listener. Well, too many people have forgotten how to listen.
Very good, Mike. You weren't that excited about my severance tax early on. I do remember that. That was one we disagreed a little bit on. I think Mike hit it on the head. It's who we elect. And I've been working hard to recruit a lot of candidates, most of them Democrats. And without exception, I've said, look, you're running to represent that district. Know your district. You're not running to be a partisan Democrat. You're running to represent the people and make that clear. And I know Adrienne Olenek, who got introduced earlier, she's going to do that for sure, I can guarantee you.
How can a Democrat vote in the August 2nd primary for a Republican?
Well, it's very difficult. One of my great supporters, she was my everything when I was Speaker of the House, Mary Lou Davis. She and her husband live in Topeka now. And I was on the phone with her yesterday, and they're in Vicki Schmidt's district. And she said she and Greg went down yesterday and switched their registration so they could vote for her. She'll be back August the 3rd to be back in the right column. And so that's appropriate if you're dedicated like that. I'm a little nervous as a Democrat getting a bunch to change, but you can help, for sure, support Republican candidates August the 2nd. You can do that very visibly, very vocally, and get your friends who are registered Republican out to vote. I don't have a problem with the change, but you know it should be for that cause and that cause alone.
I give you permission, John.
And you know that comes from the Jewish faith for this Lutheran. How much things have changed.
Who voted to re-elect Brownback? I have talked to as many people as I can in the last 3 years asking this question, and not one person did.
That's why I support the faculty member of Wichita State that wants the numbers checked out.
Well, we should check out those numbers, by the way. I would say this, that in the last election, essentially the governor was reelected really for two reasons. One's Wichita, and two are the rural areas. The rural areas of the state are, while they're declining in population, they're overwhelmingly Republican. And if you look at the 32,000 vote margin, the great majority of it came from those counties with a population of less than 10,000 each. And the other thing is that no Democrat wins the state house without Wichita. And last time, Wichita majority voted Republican. You can't be a Democrat in Kansas and win the state house without Wichita. Wichita is a critical mass for the Democrat Party running for a statewide office. It absolutely is. And John was so thankful of Wichita when he was elected, he had his inauguration down here. That shows you how important it is. And it simply, the Democrat Party didn't do enough groundwork in the rural areas to reduce the margin, and they didn't carry Wichita, and those are the two reasons.
The other thing I'd quickly add is I'm convinced that insiders knew why there should be a change in the election of 2014, but it wasn't that well known in the public. We had to sell them. I think the people of Kansas now understand, and that's why if we get out and support these good legislative candidates, we're going to have a great August and November. I just feel like that.
How do we recall and remove our current governor?
We don't have a system to do it, I don't think, Mike, do we? So, wasting any time on that is just a waste. We got to focus on what we can do, and we can do that at the 2 elections we have this year.
Do you agree or not agree with co-box voting laws?
We in Kansas, we have had a history of trying to be open and transparent and trying to encourage people to participate in the political process. And the real truth is that voting, while it is a privilege, should be easy. It should be easy. And the idea, now my mother will be 95 here in a couple of weeks. She lives in the same town she was born in. She goes to the same church she was baptized in. She's been voting in the same precinct since she was 21. And now she's got to take a picture ID to go to the polling place and vote. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Clearly, if there is voter fraud, we should find that out and those people should be prosecuted. But the number of elections ever in Kansas history influenced by voter fraud is 0. 0. We should welcome people to the polls. We should make it easier for them to vote, not harder, because it is a public process. And the more of our citizens that participate, the better government we're going to have.
I just want to make sure any press here today, anybody that's going to pass this message along, get that statement from conservative Mike Hayden about, and said very, very well. I can only endorse it, but that shows how far we've gone off the right wing. When we've got people in Topeka very opposite to what Mike just said. But Mike said it well. We need to spread that word and elect people that will get our laws back in that direction.
There are well over 100,000 students paying increased tuition at the Kansas State universities. How do we get them motivated to vote more in the upcoming elections?
If we could get Bernie to come, if anybody that's got the real answer to that, my message to all my students is you ought to be voting in greater numbers, a greater percent than any other age group. You have more at stake. We screw up today, you pay for it the rest of your life. We get things right, we invest right, you benefit. I tell them, look, at my age, what the hell do I have to be worried about? You ought to be the ones that are really agitated, turning out the most. And I also tell them, I say, you turn out and you'll start influencing elections. Politicians will change. If they're afraid of losing, and if young people are going to be the ones throwing them out, they'll find a way, at least try, attract their attention. And so, young people, I don't know what it's going to take, but I work at it at every opportunity for sure.
I remember 2 instances when I was at K-State, and one was in Ahern Fieldhouse. Everett Dirksen came to speak, the United States Senator from Illinois. And the real truth is that there was not an empty seat in the place. It was absolutely packed, and they were hanging from the rafters. The other one I remember is a debate in what is now the 2nd District of Congress, a debate between the Republican and the Democrat, who happened to both be KU graduates and happened to be former fraternity brothers at the time. And they ran against each other, and the auditorium, it was in the auditorium, and there was not an empty seat in the House. The real truth is that we paid attention, and there wasn't the 24-hour news cycle that there is today. And so if you had the chance to see a United States Senator and hear him in person, especially someone of Dirksen's prominence, well, every student on campus wanted to be in that field house. And if we had a chance to see two Kansans, one of whom was going to be the next congressman, debate face to face, nobody wanted to miss that. And we were all there. And we've had a diminution now. You can't turn on CNN or Fox or MSNBC or any of them. But what the 24-hour political news cycle continues to run and rerun. And what happens is people get worn out. They get tired of it. And they turn it off, and unfortunately they turn their back on politics, and they turn their back on the participation process. And it's critical that young people are motivated. I often said the only, until John gave me reappraisal, the only election I ever lost was when I ran for the student body at K-State. But I cared. I was motivated. I put my name on the ballot and I took a chance. And that's what's lacking today. And that's what we need so desperately. We need to inspire young people that public service is one of the highest callings. And it's one of your greatest responsibilities as a civil member of our society. So we desperately need more and more young people involved. I can't tell you how hard, and I know John did too. Back when we were in school, you had to be 21, not 18. And how hard we fought in the student body to get the voting age lowered to 18, and we finally did. What a great victory it was, but how disappointing it was that the 18 and 19 and 20 years olds didn't show up at the polls. It took years and years to get that accomplished. And it's been disappointing that, in fact, they didn't grab the ring when we gave it to them. And they need to be motivated and understand how important it is to their lives.
You haven't mentioned the tobacco settlement money being diverted from early education. Isn't this a very important investment for the future of Kansas?
Damn right. And we were told we had a limited amount of time, so I apologize. We couldn't cover everything, but that is a legitimate concern, absolutely. Another example of inappropriately taking action in Topeka to try to pretend there's no fiscal problem. Mike laid it out really well in his opening remarks in terms of downgrading our bonds and so forth. We've been hurt severely and forced to even think about those kind of crazy ideas. But that would be a very stupid move.
One of the great victories we achieved, actually, it was after John and I were gone, but one of the great victories Kansas achieved was the tobacco settlement and the long-term financial impact that has, especially to children's programs in the state. It put children's programs, not only did it elevate them, but it put them on a whole new level of solid funding. Now that's being ripped away because the rest of our economy, the rest of our budget's in so dismal a shape that, in fact, the tobacco money is now being diverted. It's a tragedy, and it shouldn't happen. The problem is that most people don't know and understand what the Children's Cabinet's about, what the Children's Fund's for, how it's funded, and why. but the decision made at the time to put that money into children's programs was a very, very wise and thoughtful decision. It pays off every single day, and it's a tragedy that the fund is being diverted one more time because we simply didn't live up to our fiscal responsibilities.
And this is our last question. Kansas has a revenue problem, not a spending problem. There is nothing left to cut. Don't we have to raise revenue from those not contributing to state taxes?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, there's no way around it. You can dodge it and try to finesse it, but the reality is we're going to have to raise taxes. But keep in mind what I said a few moments ago. The higher taxes will allow us to invest wisely, get a better return, have a better future. That's far better than lower taxes, not getting good education, not taking care of our infrastructure. That's costing us way more. We're smarter to invest wisely, which, yes, may include raising some revenue. And given this is my last opportunity at the mic, Mr. Mike, I want you to know I've had a lot of more experience losing. I can explain to you how that works. Your one loss. So we can get together on that as well. I've really enjoyed being with you today. Enjoyed being with Mike. Mike and I did this at a bank meeting one time a few years ago and had a great time. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity. And we are both counting on all of you to do your job.
John did remind you to vote in the August 2nd primary. I put my button on to remind you too. I remember how important it was because, of course, I won my first election in a primary, and they are critical. And I hope you'll all get out there and support these moderate candidates on August the 2nd. One lesson about raising taxes. When John was governor, he implemented the Kansas Water Plan because there's no natural resource that's more critical to Kansas than water. We have tremendous water problems in our state. The Ogallala is being depleted in western Kansas significantly. We've got public water supplies all over the state that are facing very, very serious problems, including right here in Wichita. So when I came into office, I said we need to take John's idea, but we're going to have to fund it. We're going to have to fund it. So I proposed a tax increase to fund the state water plan. Well, it took me 2 or 3 years, and I finally got it through the House of Representatives. And it came up to the Senate. And it was the last night of the Senate. And the vote went up on the board, and it was 20 to 19. Now it takes 21. Well, the chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee had open heart surgery, and he was in the KU Med Center. So I sent the Highway Patrol after him. They brought him into the Senate on a gurney at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he voted aye to increase taxes to fund the state water plan. And they said to him, well, Senator Bogina, the press said, did it scare you to have open heart surgery? And he said, not near as much as it did coming over here with the Highway Patrol at 110 miles an hour.